I'm pleased and proud to present my friend, an artist, art historian, and director of Addison Rowe Fine Art, Matthew Rowe, who will today talk about how to navigate a transcendental painting in celebration of her current exhibition, Agnes Pelton Desert Transcendentalist. Matthew Rowe was born in Chicago. He moved to Santa Fe as a young child. The son of an art gallery owner, Victoria Addison, he was surrounded by artists and art collectors early on. His affinity for clay, which is the medium he currently works in, began in his teens. And he recently authored a book, Raymond Johnson, a look back. It's about one of the founding fathers of the Transcendentalist painting group. Currently, Rowe is donating 50% of all proceeds from functional ceramic wares to regional food kitchens and other nonprofit organizations, which I'll let him tell you about later. But please join me in welcoming Matthew Madison Rowe.
Hello. Welcome. I'm Matthew Rowe. I'd like to start by thanking all of you for being here. Thank you to the museum for having me. Thank you to my friends at the museum and Rebecca for introducing me. This presentation started as something totally different, and having worked in the gallery and worked around transcendental painting for the past 7 years, I've noticed that some people have a reluctance, or they're a little bit afraid of abstract art. They don't really know where to start with it. And I've been very fortunate to grow up in a household with these images around since childhood. So I've stumbled upon some things over the years, and this felt like a great opportunity to share those with everybody. So again, thank you. And let's begin with what this is not. This is not going to be a lecture on Pelton's life story, the history of Theosophy, or the Transcendental painting group. There's many great resources, and hopefully this will inspire you to seek those out. This is a presentation on composition, color theory, and thought forms. So within composition, we're going to be discussing dynamic symmetry, the rule of thirds, and harmonic composition. From there, we'll move into color theory, as espoused by Vasily Kandinsky, Theosophy, and Agnes Pelton herself. And then we'll discuss thought forms, what they are, and how they relate to these types of works. From there, we're going to go all as a group, ideally, into the gallery itself, and there's some specific pieces I'd like to discuss. And ideally, the show itself will have slightly different look after this presentation. So we'll begin with composition. Dynamic symmetry, the generic harmonic armature. It's long been known that a peculiar series of numbers is connected with a phenomenon of orderly distribution of the leaves of plants. This is known as the Fibonacci sequence, and we've got the beginning of it here. It's called the summation series from the fact that each term is composed of the sum of the two preceding terms. And this series, in reality, represents the symmetry of a plant. From this series, we can obtain the entire structure of dynamic symmetry, which applies not only to the architecture of the plant, but to the architecture of man, both his physical being and the things that he makes. The basic principles underlying the greatest art so far produced in the world may be found in the proportions of the human figure and the growing plant. The principles of design found in architecture and plants have been given the name dynamic symmetry. Therefore, dynamic symmetry is present in all great works of art, whether intentional or not. This might seem familiar, but this is a visual representation of that Fibonacci sequence. I'm not going to get into the math of it right now, maybe a later lecture. And here we see the same sequence, the same spiral in nature, from the macro to the micro. Now we move on to the rule of thirds. This is the most basic compositional arrangement, and it encourages the placement of focal points on the points of intersection. So if you take your canvas, break it into thirds, vertically and horizontally, you'll see these intersections. And here we have a few basic examples of a still life and a landscape utilizing this. Proportions that are pleasing to our ear are also pleasing to our eye. Intervals of 1/3, 1/4, 1/2, 2/3, 3/4 all result in positive sensory responses. So here, basic rectangle cut in halves across the diagonals. Now we're going to connect those diagonals to the horizontal halfway points. and then we'll connect that to the vertical halfway points. And now we're going to connect the halfway points and add emphasis on those intersections at the thirds. This is the generic harmonic armature. So, how does this relate to Pelton? Born in 1881, she was raised in Brooklyn, New York. Her grandfather was a leader in America's abolitionist movement. Her father was the idle son of a wealthy Louisiana plantation owner. He lived a dissolute life, ignoring family obligations and gallivanting through Europe. A manic depressive, he died of a morphine overdose when Agnes was 9. Her father's demise left Pelton a melancholy, introverted young girl. Her mother, Florence, was studying music when Agnes was born. After her husband's death, Florence and Agnes returned to their family home in Brooklyn. There, she opened the Pelton School of Music, a piano school she operated for 30 years. This was the environment in which Agnes was raised. Music provided her a creative foundation. And here we must remember that proportions that are pleasing to our ear are also pleasing to our eye. So at this point, we can start to put things together. If we look at our basic frameworks with the harmonic armature and the golden ratio, we see a movement towards one of these intersections of thirds. And this, of course, is depending on which way you have your spiral moving. Then slightly more interesting, we can take this armature and we can add it to one of the pieces that we'll be seeing shortly. And we start to see the emphasis of thirds and the movement through these pieces. A little bit of the lattice work, the framework that goes into this. Now we'll go back through this slideshow, looking at how artists play with this framework from the abstract to the classically representational. Sometimes the focus is in between the lines, as with this fantastic Manet. Oftentimes, we see the focus within the subject's gaze into their eyes and mimicking things from the background. This is probably the most striking example. Everything moving to Washington's eye. And the oars are all playing with this armature as well. This scene, initially chaotic, broken down into thirds, makes a bit more sense. And each little space is its own painting, its own little synopsis. This is classical composition at its best. And of course, the birth of Venus. And the beginning, the creation of Adam. So from here, we're going to move into color theory. We'll begin with Kandinsky. He was a pioneer of abstract modern art and exploited the evocative interrelation between color and form. He created an aesthetic experience that engaged the sight, sound, and emotions of the public. He believed that total abstraction offered the possibility for profound transcendental expression, and copying from nature only interfered with this process. He innovated a pictorial language that only loosely related to the outside world, but it expressed volumes about the artist's inner experience. He sought to create art that communicated a universal sense of spirituality. So some of the nuances of this are a little bit vague, but the essentials are rather clear, and the following slide has everything you need to know. After we cover a few of the finer points, all of this will make a bit more sense. And actually, Emil Bistrom used this as the logo for his school up in Taos. So this is the diagram actually included in Concerning the Spiritual in Art, a book by Kandinsky, published in 1911. It seems a bit vague, but what we want to focus on are yellow and blue, the first antithesis, and yellow moving towards the spectator and blue away. So yellow, it's a triangle, it's warm, it's eccentric, it's out, it's bodily, it overspreads the boundaries, it's irresponsible. It assails every obstacle blindly and bursts forth aimlessly in every direction. It has no deep appeal. Blue is a circle, it's cold, it moves away, it's spiritual. It contains the power of profound meaning. It's a heavenly color. It's weaker when lightened. It is a retreat into oneself. And in the middle, we have red, the square. It's warm or cold. It's motion within itself. It glows in itself. It's determined, a powerful intensity. It does not distribute its vigor aimlessly. Red is a material and has no deep appeal. Now, with this in mind, the push and pull of these shapes becomes a little clearer, with the blue receding back, the yellow coming forward, and red laying in the middle ground. And this one also includes the overlaps of these colors, which we'll not be discussing today. And here we have this expressed in a great painting by Kandinsky, all the same shape, but you can feel the push and pull of colors in the canvas. And this, by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, really embodies the middle ground of red. Theosophy. Theosophy is a religion established in the United States during the late 19th century, founded by Russian immigrant Helena Blavatsky. Categorized as both a new religious movement and part of occultist Western esotericism, it draws upon old European philosophies and Asian religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism. Thought Forms, a record of clairvoyant investigation, is a theosophical book compiled by Besant and Ledbetter and published in 1901. The authors wrote that they were convinced that thoughts are things, and the task of this book was to help readers understand this. Thought Forms began in 1895 when the authors began an investigation of the subtle matter of the universe. The book begins with a table titled "A Key to the Meanings of Colors." and later discusses thought forms, which we will cover shortly. Here we have The Key, published in their book. Now, Agnes Pelton was a theosophist and was familiar with this. So here, first column, first row, high spirituality, going through all the way down to malice at the very end. This is a grounding of spiritual with the material. And here we'll go through some of these individually. Ones I thought stood out the most, so you can get a sense for what they're talking about. Find it interesting how close fear is to the highest spirituality. So from here, we're going to move on to Pelton herself. Now, Agnes Pelton was familiar with the writings of Kandinsky and the book Thought Forms. Her individual color theory was based on these texts and adapted to her taste. We are provided only a glimpse through one of her journals. This page, April 15th, 1938, we see a sketch for abstract number 3. And towards the bottom of the page is what we're interested in here. In her writing, what the colors meant to her, at least for this painting at this time. Something we'll want to keep in mind as we walk through the exhibition. Now, thought forms. Part of Theosophy, again. So some Theosophists had developed the ability to see people's auras, and they recorded their observations. Over time, patterns emerged. Specific colors and shapes correspond with specific thoughts and feelings. Thought forms are energetic projections in one's aura manifested by one's thoughts or emotions. These defined mental, emotional states manifest similarly in everyone. These drawings are visual approximations of energetic projections manifesting from mental, emotional states. That sentence is quite a mouthful. So here we have thought forms. These ones I picked specifically because I felt they referred to the show.
Wir taten unser Äußerstes. Er ist hochmütig, er ist frech und stark.
nỗi chẳng yêu ai vì người ta đã vô tội. Bây giờ tôi chẳng còn tin trong nhân gian có kẻ như thế. Tôi
So this was also part of the book, and concerts, venues, had their own projections of thought forms. This one was a concert of Mendelssohn. And this is where we're going to shift gears and start putting all these pieces together, kind of warming up for our walkthrough of the gallery. So on the right, we have the painting of her mother, a music instructor. The left, a concert. Also, on the lower left of her painting, there's this curious thought form. And there's more obviously in here, but with these in mind, and also the geometry we saw earlier, the painting itself has a slightly different meaning. A great representation, there's a few of these in the book, but this was most apt. And the Pelton on the right, which was thought to be a representation of Agni Yoga, Agni meaning fire, burning away ignorance, enlightenment, helpful thoughts. This one is interesting. The top line we see often in abstract art. The painting on the right, of course, being Pelton's ode to her father, the one that passed away when she was young, perhaps depicting an intention to know this person that she didn't. Of course, these are only suggestions. There's no rule for interpreting art. It's really completely up to you as the viewer, but having a historic context always, for me, makes it a little bit more exciting. It's connecting the dots throughout history and perhaps giving an opportunity to look at things a little bit differently. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. We've got a bunch of handouts over here, and I believe we'll be kind of flowing straight through these big doors into the exhibition itself. And I would like to kind of pick out a few pieces, but as we're going through, if there are specifics that stand out to any of you, all of you, let's just kind of have an informal discussion of Agnes Pelton's work. Thank you again.